The city was buzzing with whispers. Gangsters, known for their ruthlessness, controlled the docks, the back alleys, the shadows where fear ruled. Everyone who walked past their territory felt it, that silent warning in the air. They believed nothing could touch them. They walked like kings in a land built on intimidation. People stepped aside. Store owners kept their heads down. Even the police hesitated to step too close. The gangsters weren't just dangerous, they were untouchable in their own eyes. Enter Steven Seagal. He moved quietly, his presence almost invisible. No flashy entrance, no loud announcements. Just a man walking through a world that had convinced itself it was safe. He didn't carry weapons. He didn't boast. But there was a calm intensity in the way he carried himself, a kind of quiet confidence that made people notice without realizing it. Even from a distance, his eyes scanned the surroundings, missing nothing, aware of every movement, every shadow, every whisper. The gang's leader had heard rumors. They said an outsider had been seen around the docks, someone with skills, someone who didn't flinch when danger came near. He scoffed at it. Some old man thinks he can walk into our territory. Let's teach him a lesson, he said, laughing. The men around him joined in, their laughter echoing off the walls. They had no idea. They had never faced anyone like him. Every thug believed they were untouchable, every step confident, every smirk sharp. As Steven walked closer to their territory, he didn't rush. His steps were measured, deliberate. He wasn't scared. There was no hesitation. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he didn't need to. Trouble seemed to find him naturally. The docks smelled of salt and oil, the fog thickened with every step, and the gangsters watched from the shadows. They saw him coming, yet they didn't understand what he was capable of. A few of the younger gang members whispered nervously among themselves. Their eyes followed him, curious, confused, uneasy. They expected fear in his eyes. They expected weakness. Instead, they saw focus, determination, calm, and in that calm, something they couldn't name, something that made them step back without realizing why. The leader raised an eyebrow, signaling his men. "Let's see what this old man can do," he muttered. They were confident, as always, thinking the story would end quickly. Little did they know, the story had already begun, and it wasn't going to be what they expected. Have you ever seen someone underestimated and completely surprised everyone? The tension was thick as Steven stepped closer. The gangsters had circled him, smirks plastered on their faces, the knives glinting in the dim light. They moved with that overconfidence only people who've never been challenged could have. One of them, tall and broad, stepped forward first, cracking his knuckles. "You lost, old man." He sneered, the laugh in his voice sharp and mocking. Every word was meant to intimidate, to make him back down. But Steven didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His eyes stayed steady, calm, taking in everything, the distance between them, the angle of the walls, the shadowed corners where more men lurked. The leader watched silently, arms crossed, as if sizing up a puzzle. The younger gang members shifted nervously. They weren't used to someone standing still under such obvious threat. Most would have lunged, yelled, tried to scare. Not him. Steven's stillness was a weapon of its own. The first thug took a half step forward, swinging his fist carelessly, expecting to land a hit that would decide everything. The punch came fast, but Steven moved like water, a slight turn of his body and the fist met nothing but air. Then, with a single motion, the thug found himself on the ground, dazed and unbalanced, as if the world itself had shifted under him. The others froze for a heartbeat. Some laughed nervously, thinking it a fluke, but the flicker of doubt was already there. Steven's movements were controlled, deliberate, almost effortless. Each step, each shift of weight, carried purpose. He didn't waste energy. He didn't overreact. And that made the gangsters nervous because it was nothing they had expected. Nothing in their world of chaos prepared them for precision, for calm force. Another thug lunged, knife raised, thinking surprise would give him the edge. Steven's hand caught the wrist mid-air, twisting in a motion so quick it was almost invisible. The knife clattered to the ground. The man stumbled back, cursing, clutching his arm as Steven stood unshaken. He didn't move toward them aggressively. He didn't have to. Every thug watching now realized they were reacting, not acting. They were stepping into a game they didn't understand, reacting to someone who was always 3 moves ahead without even seeming to plan it. The leader barked orders, trying to regain control.
"Take him!"
"Don't let him move." But the confidence in his voice had faltered. The younger gang members hesitated, looking at each other. They had seen fights before, seen men fall, seen chaos, but not like this. Not someone who could neutralize threat after threat without even raising his voice. Steven's eyes flicked from one to another, reading their intent, their fear, their impatience. It was like watching children playing at war, pretending to be dangerous. And yet, every step, Every movement of his opponents only confirmed one thing. They were dangerous only because they thought they were. Remove that belief and there was nothing. That's exactly what he did. He moved again, subtle, almost unseen, and the gangsters found themselves off balance, reacting instead of attacking. One tried a kick. Steven shifted, caught the leg, guided it down, and the man crumpled to the ground. Another charged, fists flailing, shouting curses. But he was met with a calm redirection that left him sprawling. Every thug that came at him fell into the same trap, not of strength, but of patience and control. The gangsters had no idea how to handle someone who refused to fight their way. The leader's smirk faltered. He realized slowly the illusion of power he had built around himself and his men was cracking. He took a step back, eyes narrowing, trying to hide the unease that was creeping in. Steven didn't chase them. He didn't need to. The men were unraveling on their own. Fear had a different rhythm here. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was precise, quiet. And it spread through them like cold water through a dry sponge. By the time the confrontation had gone on only minutes, what was meant to be an easy show of dominance had turned into confusion, frustration, and disbelief. The gangsters were stunned. They had underestimated him completely. And now every instinct they had to intimidate, to attack, to control was failing them. The calm, deliberate presence of Steven Seagal had flipped the game entirely. Have you ever seen someone completely unshaken in the face of chaos? The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the narrow alley. Steven's calm had already thrown the gangsters off balance, but now, as they regrouped, something changed. The younger men exchanged quick, anxious glances. Their confidence had been shaken, and with each failed attempt to corner him, frustration built. One of them, chest heaving, tried to take the lead again, his fists raised, his steps uneven. His movements were faster now, more desperate. He lunged at Steven with a wild swing, hoping sheer force would finally overwhelm him. Steven didn't move backward. He simply shifted his weight, redirected the momentum, and the man stumbled forward off balance, barely catching himself before hitting the ground. The shift was so subtle, so precise, that it seemed almost like the thug had fallen on his own. He cursed under his breath, rage flickering in his eyes, and lunged again, only to meet the same calm resistance. Each failed attempt didn't teach him caution. It fed his anger, and that anger made him sloppy. The others circled, watching, waiting for a moment to strike. They whispered, muttered plans that never fully formed. Every second they hesitated, the edge of fear sharpened in their minds. Steven's movements were minimal, yet effective, each step calculated, each gesture deliberate. He didn't rush, he didn't panic. He stayed in control, a steady presence in the storm. And that control was terrifying. The gangsters were beginning to realize they weren't in charge here. The leader growled, stepping forward, trying to restore authority. "Nof." His voice cut through the alley, but it lacked conviction. The younger men's movements had slowed. Their energy was raw, reactive. They attacked again in waves, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. But Steven didn't react like someone being pressured. He flowed with them, guided them, used their own force against them. A punch aimed at his chest slid harmlessly as he pivoted. A kick redirected and the attacker sent sprawling. Every strike that came at him seemed to find a counter without effort. The air was filled with the sounds of impact, grunts and thuds, but Steven remained calm. His breathing was steady, his eyes sharp, tracking every shift, every attempt at aggression. The gangsters were escalating, trying harder, moving faster, attacking with more reckless intensity, and yet, each of their moves only exposed more openings. Steven exploited them with minimal effort, every redirection precise, every hold exact. The younger men were exhausted after just a few attempts, their attacks wild, uncoordinated, and ineffective. The leader's frustration boiled over. He stepped closer, raising his fists, trying to take on Steven himself. But even his presence didn't intimidate. Steven's gaze met his unflinching, unshaken, and for a moment, the leader faltered. He realized that the illusion of control he had relied on was slipping. He barked orders, trying to force his men to attack again, to regain some sense of power. But the gangsters were hesitant now, uncertain, their previous confidence eroded. Their movements lacked the reckless aggression from before. They were reacting, not acting. One thug attempted a desperate grab from behind, hoping to catch Steven off guard. But Steven's awareness was total. With a subtle shift, he turned, guiding the man forward and sending him tumbling into a nearby wall. The sound of impact echoed, and the man groaned, stunned. Another charged with a knife, but Steven's timing was impeccable. The knife clattered to the ground, the attacker stumbling back in shock. Each move, each reaction, was a reminder of the gap between them, not strength, not speed, but control, focus, and calm. The gangsters' frustration grew into panic. They were acting out of instinct now, not strategy. Desperation replaced bravado, and every attack became more erratic. Steven didn't push, he didn't need to. Their mistakes built upon themselves, creating chaos around them without him raising his voice. He simply existed within it, calm and deliberate, the center of a storm they couldn't understand. The leader shouted again, furious, but even his words had lost power. His men were scattered, unsure, hesitant. Every punch thrown, every swing of a knife, every reckless charge only highlighted their weakness. And through it all, Steven moved with patience. He didn't need to dominate with force alone. He dominated with presence, with precision, with a stillness that unsettled everyone around him. The alley was a whirlwind of confusion, the gangsters' escalating aggression meeting an unshakable calm. Their frustration turned to fear, subtle at first, then unmistakable. They were beginning to understand that escalation was not a weapon here. It was a trap. And with each failed attack, each misstep, Steven remained the constant, the unmovable force that no amount of aggression could unsettle. Have you ever seen someone remain completely in control? Even as chaos surrounds them, the moment shifted in a blink. 1 second, the gangsters thought they had the upper hand. The next, everything changed. Steven's calm wasn't just unshakable, it was magnetic. He moved with purpose, every gesture deliberate, every step measured. The gangsters, still reeling from their own mistakes, barely noticed the subtle shift in his stance. His eyes locked on the leader, steady, unflinching, and in that instant, the power dynamic flipped. They had thought they were in control, but control is an illusion, especially when underestimating someone like Steven. He didn't rush. He didn't yell or swing wildly. He simply let their momentum carry them forward, their aggression turning against them. The younger thugs charged again, hoping to overwhelm him, and that's when it happened. A single pivot and a simple redirection, and suddenly they were off balance, crashing into one another. Their coordinated attack dissolved into chaos, and in that moment, the fear that had been simmering now bubbled to the surface. Steven's calmness was no longer just unsettling, it was dominating. He stepped forward, and it wasn't just movement, it was a signal. Every shift of his weight, every subtle motion, drew the gangsters' attention. Their eyes tracked him, their bodies tensed, and their earlier confidence began to crumble. The leader barked orders, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The momentum was gone. The gangsters hesitated, second-guessing every move. Each pause, each moment of uncertainty, widened the gap between them and Steven. He didn't need to strike with brute force. He didn't need to display speed or strength. Control was enough, and he had it completely. One of the younger men lunged, desperate, and Steven sidestepped effortlessly, using the attacker's energy to send him sprawling. Another swung a chain, hoping to scare him, but Steven's timing was flawless. The chain swung past harmlessly, and the attacker's momentum carried him into a dumpster with a loud crash. The alley was filled with noise, confusion, and the scent of panic, but Steven remained steady. Each small victory was enough to tilt the balance further. The gangsters had overestimated their own skill and underestimated his, and that mistake now dictated every decision they made. Every attack they attempted was reactive. Every movement came from fear and frustration rather than strategy. Steven noticed the smallest cues, the tightening of a jaw, the flinch before a swing, the hesitation in a charge. Each sign of doubt became an opportunity. He guided them without effort. A force of nature that needed no explanation, no struggle. The gangsters were trapped in their own misjudgment, and Steven was the one who controlled the game. He moved between them with ease, minimal gestures, but maximal impact. One punch deflected, one shove redirected, and suddenly the attackers were on the ground, tangled, confused, unsure what had just happened. Their fear grew with each failed strike, each misstep, and Steven didn't even have to raise his voice. The calm in his stance, the confidence in his eyes, amplified their panic. They were acting faster now but thought slower. Every high-pressure decision they tried to make was clouded by underestimating him, and every error compounded the chaos. The leader, noticing his men falling apart, stepped forward, fists raised, anger written across his face. Steven didn't flinch. Instead, he moved just enough to unbalance the leader, letting his own momentum become the weapon. The leader stumbled, shocked, realizing the gap between his expectation and reality was enormous. The younger gangsters froze, watching, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Every hesitation, every split-second pause was a win for Steven. Their earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by fear, doubt, and a growing sense of helplessness. Steven's presence alone dictated the pace now. He didn't chase, he didn't strike unnecessarily. He simply remained present, calm, and controlled, and that was enough to dismantle the gangsters' attacks one by one. The alley became a landscape of chaos, but Steven was the eye of the storm. Every error they made traced back to a single source, their misjudgment of him. How does underestimating someone's skill impact their decisions in high-pressure moments? The question hung in the air as the gangsters struggled to react, their confidence shattered, their instincts unreliable. They were trapped in their own overconfidence, and every move they made only reinforced the lesson they hadn't wanted to learn. Underestimating Steven Seagal was their biggest mistake. Small attacks kept coming, but they were futile. A punch here, a grab there, and each one was expertly turned aside. The gangsters' momentum worked against them. Their misjudgment dictated their every move, and Steven simply guided them with subtle, precise movements. He didn't have to force victory. It unfolded naturally from their own errors, from the psychological weight of underestimating someone who thrived under pressure. Even their coordination, once assumed to be an advantage, now worked against them. As they hesitated, misstepped, and collided, the gap between them and Steven widened. He was always one step ahead, not because he predicted every strike, but because they had already decided the outcome in their minds. They thought they could control him. That miscalculation had cost them every ounce of confidence. Each failed attempt, each stumble, each crash into another gang member, all fed into the larger picture. Steven remained calm, unwavering, precise. The gangsters' panic grew. Their reactions slowed under pressure, clouded by fear and frustration. And in the center of it all, Steven moved effortlessly, a constant reminder that underestimating skill in high-pressure moments can unravel even the most confident decisions. The moment reached a peak so intense it felt like the air itself had thickened. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat seemed amplified. Steven's focus was absolute. His awareness extending to the smallest detail around him, the subtle shift of weight, the barely audible footstep, the flinch of an attacker who realized too late that they were already behind. The gangsters had tried everything they knew, every tactic, every bluff, every burst of aggression, and yet here they were, faltering, exposed, vulnerable. It was as if their own energy was betraying them, pushing them toward mistakes before they even realized it. Steven didn't rush. He didn't panic. He didn't need to. His calm, deliberate movements contrasted sharply with the chaos erupting around him. Every swing, every lunge, every attempt from the gangsters was met with a precise response, not just defensive but controlling. He redirected their force with subtle shifts of his body, turning aggression into a weapon against them. One thug rushed forward, fists raised, thinking momentum would carry him through, and in a heartbeat, Steven sidestepped, guiding him into the wall with just the right angle, leaving him stunned, gasping, and off balance. Another came from the side, swinging wildly, and Steven met the attack with minimal effort, redirecting it in a way that the attacker stumbled into his own accomplices, creating a chain reaction of chaos. It wasn't just physical control, it was psychological. Each gangster, each one of them, was forced to confront the reality that their assumptions had been completely wrong. Every movement they made was slower, every strike more hesitant, every plan faltering. They were reacting to him, not acting on their own terms. Steven's mastery wasn't just skill, it was the invisible hand shaping the entire battle. He didn't have to strike hard to win. He simply had to exist in the space, and their own errors filled the gaps, turning their confidence into panic. As the fight escalated, the alley became a stage of confusion. The gangsters tried to regroup, but their coordination was gone, broken by fear and the realization that they had miscalculated. Steven moved among them like a calm storm, fluid, predictable only in his unpredictability. Every time they lunged, he redirected them. Every time they attempted to corner him, he shifted, and their trap collapsed under the weight of their own mistakes. The leader shouted orders, but no one could respond effectively. Their high-pressure decisions were clouded by stress, frustration, and the creeping awareness that they were completely outmatched. Steven's strikes were precise, minimal, yet devastating in effect. A push here, a deflection there, and suddenly a gangster found himself sprawled on the ground, dizzy, disoriented, unsure of how it had happened. The chaos amplified with each misstep. Attacks that should have been synchronized fell apart. Fists collided with nothing. Kicks missed entirely. One by one, the gangsters were dismantled not just physically but mentally. Every failed attempt increased their hesitation. Every stumble deepened their panic. And through it all, Steven remained the eye of the storm, steady, calm, calculating. Even as multiple attackers tried to overwhelm him at once, Steven's awareness allowed him to anticipate the consequences of every move before it happened. A punch deflected, a kick redirected, a grab avoided with the slightest twist of his wrist, and suddenly the attacker found himself entangled with another. Momentum, energy, and aggression, the very things the gangsters had counted on, were used against them effortlessly. Their confidence eroded with each passing second, replaced by doubt, fear, and an increasing sense of helplessness. The leader, seeing his men failing, tried to step in, but Steven had already anticipated the move. With a single well-timed maneuver, he neutralized the leader's momentum, forcing him backward, unbalancing him and leaving him exposed. The other gangsters, watching their strongest member falter, froze for just a fraction of a second, enough for Steven to seize control completely. Each misstep, each hesitation, compounded the chaos, leaving the attackers trapped in a spiral of their own creation. Steven's presence dominated every square foot of the alley. He didn't need to fight aggressively. He simply guided the flow of the battle, letting the gangsters' own mistakes dictate the outcome. Every attempt to strike, every high-pressure decision, every frantic move played right into his hands. They were acting under the weight of fear, underestimating the control he had, underestimating the precision of his skill. And that miscalculation, more than anything else, ensured their downfall. As the climactic moments unfolded, the alley became a theater of their errors, a chain reaction of failed attacks, missed strikes, and growing panic. Steven moved with minimal effort, yet every gesture, every step, every deflection magnified the impact. Their own decisions under pressure, their overestimation of themselves and underestimation of him, carried them into defeat. The chaos swirled around him, but he remained composed, precise, and fully in control. The alley was quiet now, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged with the remnants of the chaos that had just passed. Gangsters sprawled on the ground, groaning, rubbing sore muscles, and staring in disbelief at the one man who had dismantled them so completely. Steven Seagal stood there calm, his breathing steady, his presence unshaken. He hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to exert force unnecessarily. The weight of his skill, the precision of his movements, and the sheer inevitability of his control had done all the work for him. Those who had attacked him were still trying to process what had just happened. Their adrenaline was fading, replaced by a creeping sense of shame and frustration. Every one of them replayed the fight in their minds, recognizing the exact moments where their overconfidence had been their undoing. Steven hadn't just defeated them physically. He had dismantled their assumptions, shattered their bravado, and left them questioning everything they thought they knew about strength and strategy. He moved slowly, surveying the scene, ensuring no one could rise again before he finally relaxed his stance. Even now, the gangsters weren't entirely aware of how effortlessly he had controlled the fight. They remembered flailing, missing, hitting nothing, getting tangled with each other, and suddenly being on the ground without understanding how it had all gone wrong. How does underestimating someone's skill impact their decisions in high-pressure moments? The answer wasn't in words. It was in the bruises, the stumbles, the disoriented looks of men who had misjudged one opponent. Some tried to scramble to their feet, nursing egos as much as bodies, but Steven's presence was magnetic, unrelenting, commanding attention without effort. Each attempt to move forward was met with a subtle shift of weight, a glance, a positioning that reminded them they were still under his control, even in their weakest, most vulnerable state. The alley itself seemed to echo the dominance he held, not with sound, but with the way the gangsters hesitated, measured, and ultimately retreated inward, constrained by fear and respect they didn't yet admit to themselves. Steven's calm wasn't arrogance. It wasn't performance. It was a statement. Every measured step, every observation of their staggered attempts to regain composure, reinforced a lesson that skill and control outweighed raw aggression. They had come with confidence, ready to overwhelm him, and had left understanding, viscerally, how fragile that confidence could be. The consequences of underestimating someone like Steven weren't theoretical. They were immediate, physical, and undeniable. Even as he turned to leave, he didn't rush. There was no haste, no need to flaunt the victory. Each gangster remained rooted to the spot, not just bruised and sore, but mentally occupied with the sheer mastery they had witnessed. Steven's exit was quiet, almost casual, but the echo of his presence lingered, a silent statement of authority that extended far beyond the fight itself. The aftermath wasn't just about the bruises, the aching muscles, or the embarrassment. It was about perspective. The gangsters now faced a choice to reflect on what had happened, to reconsider their strategies, their overconfidence, their assumptions, or to cling to pride and ignore the lesson. And that choice, that subtle mental battle, was as significant as the fight itself. The quiet of the alley allowed for thought, reflection, and an unspoken acknowledgement. Skill, composure, and calm decisiveness could turn the tide of even the most threatening situations. And while Steven walked away, unhurried, unshaken, the lesson remained behind, etched in the minds of those who had miscalculated, a stark reminder that underestimating someone could unravel even the strongest facade of power. Every movement of Steven's that day, Every choice, every subtle control, had left a lasting mark, not just physically, but mentally, in the decision-making, the hesitation, and the newly tempered approach of the gangsters. They had learned, painfully, that pressure revealed true skill, and arrogance could be the greatest vulnerability of all. The alley, once chaotic, now held a different energy, an energy of respect, fear, and the undeniable power of presence. Even in silence, even without a word spoken, the lesson was clear: those who misjudge, miscalculate, or dismiss the abilities of another under pressure will always be at a disadvantage. And as Steven's figure disappeared into the distance, the alley seemed to hold a question that would linger long after. How does underestimating someone's skill impact their decisions in high-pressure moments? The answer was written in the staggered steps, in the slow realization, and in the unspoken acknowledgement of a fight that had been won before a single blow needed to be decisive.